I'm really excited that I'm going to have a chance to talk to you about word processing. This is one of the most important programs you can use as a student and as an adult. You will use this throughout your entire life, and the basics that you learned last year I'm going to review this time around and hopefully teach you a little bit more about what these word processors can do. What a word processor does, if you haven't already used one, is allow you to type and manipulate the text that you type in such a way that you format it exactly the way you want it. It can make a big difference when turning in homework and presenting your work to a teacher or to a potential employer. If you make it look good, if you make it easy to read, then you'll have a much better time later on. One of the most basic skills that you can use in a word processor and also on the computer are the things that you can do with moving text. The first thing that you probably already know is the click and drag. The click and drag method of highlighting text allows you to highlight exactly what you want and then move it somewhere else or delete it. So if you go over to some text and you click and hold down the left mouse button and drag it over an area, you've highlighted it. Now if you go to the edit menu or use your keyboard shortcuts such as Control-C or Control-X, you can move that text or copy that text and manipulate it in a variety of different ways. Right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this text. So I'm going to use the Command-C on the Mac. On the machines that you're using right now with a Windows keyboard, that is the Windows button, is the Command button. So you'd want to hold down the Command button and hit C for copy. You can then go over to where you want to insert the text that you just copied. Let's say over here. And then you can use the Command V for paste. Now Command V it's not too intuitive right off the bat why they use V. If you imagine text being written down, and let's say your teacher was grading it, in the old days what they would do is if they felt you needed to add a word or a phrase someplace, they would use like this little V arrow above the text and then write what you should have written in there above that V arrow. So the V represents the insertion point, where you're going to put that text. Control-X is the cut command. Let's try that out. I'm going to highlight some more text right now, and we're going to cut it. So that's Command-X, and that cuts out the text. And it saves it to something called the clipboard. It's a hidden storage, temporary storage area that the computer has that the text moves into. Now, once it's on that clipboard, you can move it to anywhere else in your document. You can even move it to other programs. For example, if I had some text inside a word processor that I want to move into Photoshop Elements, I would use the Command-X and then go to where I wanted to insert it. I'm going to show you how that works. And here I'm hitting Command-V, and you'll see I insert the text that I cut out and pasted it into that area. Now this text is still in the clipboard. So you can paste, 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 paste as many times as you like. But as soon as you cut something else or copy some other text, that clipboard, that temporary storage that this text that I just pasted was in, gets rewritten with the new information. So I'm going to just do a Command-C right now after I highlight some text. Here, let me highlight this. Command-C. And then I'm going to go over here and hit Command-V. And you'll see now the text that I copied is in the clipboard, and it's being inserted into the rest of the document right now. And again, that can be pasted over and over and over again until something else is written into the clipboard. There's some programs out there that allow you to store more than one thing in a clipboard. It gets a little cumbersome and awkward, and that's why most computers don't have these programs already installed in them, the operating system. We'll just use a clipboard like most computers use them, both the Windows and Macs. Just one item at a time that you copy or paste. Okay, so we did the click and drag, and I'm going to do that again, click and drag, to highlight the text that you want to copy or paste. There's another method, and I know we covered this last year, but I'll just show it to you right now. If you double click on a word it highlights the whole word. If you triple click on a word, let me try that here, it'll do the whole sentence that word is in. So if you just need to move one sentence, the click and drag may be a little bit awkward, especially if the text is small. So the triple click is really quite useful. Let's say if you wanted to move a sentence to a different area in the document, you just triple click it. Don't try and click and drag. It just would be too awkward. You can also use the Command A. That means select all. So the whole document is now selected. Let me show you how it looks like. Okay. And then you could take that whole document or that whole paragraph or that whole sentence, if the document was just one sentence, and move it somewhere else, or change it, or delete it, whatever you want. There's also keyboard selections that you can do to copy and paste without a mouse. I'm not going to cover those. They're a little bit awkward. They tend to be used by people with handicaps or difficulties using the mouse. So if you wanted to learn those, go for it. I rarely, if ever, use those tools, and unless you have a handicap or a problem, I don't see you using it in the future. Oftentimes those tools don't work too between programs. So let's say if I use the keyboard command for highlighting a sentence in, let's say, OpenOffice, and I go to Photoshop and want to put that sentence into Photoshop, that keyboard command that I use to highlight and copy that whole sentence in OpenOffice will most likely not work in Photoshop. So I'm just going to show you what works throughout most programs in the Windows and Macintosh environment. Okay, there's also shift clicking. This is really useful. I use shift clicking almost all the time, and let me show you how that looks like. I put the insertion point, or the cursor, the flashing line there, that bar up and down, at a point inside the text, and then I move that I, right here, that I inserter to where I want to end my highlighting. So basically I put it at the beginning, the flashing cursor, and then I move this bar to where I want to finish my highlighting. And then I hold down the shift button on the keyboard and I click, and it highlights everything in between. This works with almost any program in the Windows or Mac environment. It's really useful if you want to just copy a whole page or 2 pages. You put that I insertion point where you want it at the beginning of where you want to highlight. Click once, you'll get that flashing bar. You go to a down page or 2, whatever you want to highlight, and put your cursor to where you want to end your highlighting. Hold down that shift button and then click. And then everything in between the insertion point and the second click gets highlighted. Then you can copy it, you can paste it, you can delete it. It doesn't matter what you want to do. It'll highlight it just like all the other highlights in the Word operating system or in OpenOffice. In the OpenOffice environment, it doesn't seem to work in the Word environment. If you do quadruple click, that's 4 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, it highlights the whole paragraph. I really like this feature. If you wrote, let's say, some sort of document about, let's say, planets, and you had a chapter on Jupiter, you could highlight that whole chapter by quadruple clicking in OpenOffice. It doesn't seem to work in Microsoft Word. But then you could move it to another position in your paper if you felt that it was in the wrong place to begin with. There are also some really cool things that we can do. I know this is a lot of this is a review of what we did last year, but you can format the text differently. Now, I'm going to go up to Format Paragraph just to give you an idea of what we can do. Now, this is in the drop-down menu. You do not necessarily have to go in there. A lot of these tools are in that command or toolbar at the top of the word processor, both in OpenOffice and Word. But I'm going to show you some of the options that we have here in OpenOffice. You can indent spaces. You can choose the indentation before text, after text, in the first line. The indenting is used in many of the documents in like normal writing. Many business letters don't do indenting, but that's a different story. You can also choose the automatic indenting, which is nice sometimes. You can also do spacing above and below paragraphs, so you can increase the spacing or decrease it based on what you want to do. If your teacher told you needed a 2-page document and you only wrote 2 lines, well, then you can increase the spacing, I'm kidding of course, until there's a sentence on each page. That really isn't what you want to do. There's also line spacing. And sometimes your teacher will ask you to use double line spacing, especially in like college or in high school. What the double line spacing allows you to do, and let me go down to double line spacing, and let me first highlight some text. Here we go. I'm going to highlight some text. And I'm going to go up to Format, Paragraph, and I'm going to do line spacing and do double line spacing, and then hit OK. What this allows you to do is it adds like an extra line in between each line that you wrote. If somebody says, a teacher asks you to do a 2-page paper, they may say, you know, and make sure it's double spaced. That's what they mean, double line spaced. This allows the teacher to write in notes in between your lines so that you get a better feel for what the teacher would have wanted out of you. She can write in notes, or he can. Insertions, like that little V mark that I was talking about earlier, they can write it in by hand. If you missed a the or a word somewhere, they would use that little V mark and then write the word above it. It's a very useful feature, and if you didn't know how to do it, that would be a bit of a find. You'd have to really hunt around to find that. It may not come intuitively. So that's under Format, Paragraph. Also, you see here, you can set the margins. This is really cool. Over here, you've got the margins. You've got this up arrow and down arrow on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, you just have this up arrow. This dictates what your margins are like on what's highlighted or the whole document. If nothing's highlighted, it may not do the whole document. So you'd want to do Select All, like this, Select All. And then you can change the margins for the whole document if you had written something ahead of time. If you had written nothing before, then you could adjust this ahead of time, and then it would just go from page to page. You wouldn't have to adjust anything. That margin change would go throughout the whole document. But if you'd already written something and you thought, oh man, it's too wide, this is what you'd want to do. You'd want to highlight, Select All, that's Command A or the Windows A on the machines that you have there, and then make the margin adjustments. You can also do it on a paragraph per paragraph, and let me just show you that. I'm going to highlight just one paragraph here and then change the margin on that paragraph so that you actually have different margins within the same document. And this is more useful when you're quoting, let's say, a book, a paragraph out of a book or something. In high school and college, you're going to be doing this more than right now. Oftentimes, quoted text, the margins are brought in from the left and right. And that makes, let me just show you real quick. I'm going to just pinch in about 5 spaces on either side. And that makes it known to the reader that what you're doing is you're quoting text. That's for more formal writing, especially in college. Let's see. Oh, yes. Some of you really enjoyed this last year. You don't use this too much except in titles and things, but we're going to cover it anyway. You have different types of formatting. Now, on this text that I sort of brought in the margins on, I'm going to play with it a little bit here. By default, that means without making any changes to the original document, the formatting or the alignment is to the left. And that's normally how you write anyway. The words are lined up on the left-hand side. You see how they're all sort of flush, straight line up and down on the left-hand side? That's formatted to the left. I'm going to format this to the right. And you'll see all the text is now brought over to the right-hand side, and it's all lined up on the right-hand side. And now I'm going to center it. This is what you'd want to do for a title. You'll see now everything is formatted according to an imaginary center line there. And all the text sort of, the lines, each line is spaced out based on that imaginary line. Then there's one called full justification. This is used by newspapers or magazines, especially when you have narrow columns. It doesn't work too well in broad columns, but in narrow columns it works really nicely. It makes it something easier to read. I'm going to do justified right now. And you'll see how the text sort of, the spacing between the words got adjusted so that the text is lined up both on the left and right hand side. If you have really wide margins, this can look really terrible. But in narrow margins or columns like you'd find in a magazine or newspaper, this works really, really well. You can also boldface something. Let me click on that. and that makes the text big and bold. You can italicize it. That slants the text and makes it more scripty looking, like it was written by hand. And then you can underline it too. And there you go. To undo those things, you just click on underline again. Gets rid of the underline. To undo the italics, you click on the italics again. And to undo the bold, you click on the bold again. That is pretty much what I wanted to cover in this. Well, no, let me do one more thing. Tabs. Many of you don't even know what the tab button is for. What the tab button does, I'm going to go over here and just put an insertion point in there and hit tab. What that does is it moves over the line or whatever text you have 5 spaces. By default, when you were typing on an old typewriter, new paragraphs would be indented by 5 spaces, and that's represented up here. You'll see on this ruler at the top, you got 1 space, 2 space, 3 space, 4 space, 5 space. And right there underneath is like an inverted T. That is first tab mark. The second tab mark brings you to the next T, just like that. And then third, and so on and so forth. To get rid of tabs, you just hit delete. They're treated by the word processor just like a letter or any text that you would type. Of course, you could automatically indent things. We'll cover that later. But right now, this is what we have. Now, at the top, you can adjust these tab marks. There, I'm going to go over 2 spaces, 1, 2. You'll see how it adjusted the position of the first tab. See that? I'm moving it back and forth now. Just back and forth. So if you didn't want to go full 5 spaces, you could indent just as much as you wanted. You could indent all the way over to the other side of the page. I don't know how useful that would be, but you could. And so now if I hit, I'm going to get rid of that tab, and if I hit tab now, it just goes to where I set the tab mark. And you'll see the tab mark looks a little bit different. It looks like an L, like a dark L. So that's pretty much what we're going to cover. I've got some exercises for you to run through to manipulate some of this text. And if you have any questions, just ask your teacher. Thanks.